In turn, this will cause you, when you start to become insulin resistant, then you will start to become also leptin resistant. So leptin is a hormone that is kind of like the fuel gauge in your car. It dictates how hungry you're going to get. So when you are in a state of low calories for a prolonged period of time, so a lot of times people who are in, figure competitions, bodybuilding competitions, right, where they are restricting their calories for a prolonged period of time, they're also increasing their activity level for a prolonged period of time. The body will start to be like, hey, let's increase hunger, right? That's leptin. Leptin is increasing your hunger, and let's also decrease movement. So even though you're still going to the gym, you're still working out, you're going to feel less like moving because of the leptin. Hello, Aaron Kubitz, personal trainer, functional aesthetics EC, helping average guys perform better inside and outside the gym. So today's video, I'm going to be talking about or making a little bit of a shift from my 12 muscle building mistakes series to offer you a little bit of insight on metabolism, specifically when it comes to fat loss, building muscle, so on and so forth. So growing up, and this is, when I graduated high school back in 2003, so, back then, nutrition information wasn't as readily available as it is today, and there was a lot of misconceptions around the topic of metabolism, fat burning, things like that. And even though we've progressed a lot in 2023, there is still some of this misconception that prevails today. One of these is that I have a slow metabolism, therefore it is harder for me to lose weight or lose body fat, right? Or my friend has a fast metabolism, therefore they can eat a lot of stuff and they're not going to lose weight as quickly. Or they're not going to gain weight as quickly and they can lose weight more easily, right? So the purpose of today's video is to shed some light on the reality of the, quotes, fast metabolism, slow metabolism myth, and hopefully give you some hope for that it is not set in stone and that you can in fact reset your metabolism and make some changes to that based upon lifestyle choices that you make. So as some of you might know, if you've been following my channel for a while, my interest in natural bodybuilding and nutrition was started towards the end of high school. Prior to that, I had been since about 11 years old. I had been pretty involved in sports. My dad was a kind of a sports fanatic. He loved playing basketball. He was a power lifter in the Marine Corps, and my mom was kind of a health food person. So between the two of them, they kept our family pretty healthy and active. And I got my own interest in doing fitness type things when I was about 11, and continued that on throughout high school. Now, towards the end of high school, after suffering some injuries as a long distance runner, I transitioned over into lifting weights to stay in shape and fell in love with getting bigger and stronger. And in that process, ended up getting some digestive issues, which caused me to lose about 30 pounds of muscle and kind of sparked my interest in getting into the deeper understanding of nutrition and exercise science. So early on in my studies, one of the first things that I learned in reading and studying about bodybuilding is that a fast metabolism is good both for gaining weight and for losing weight. And a slow metabolism will make it harder to lose weight, but it will also make it harder to gain weight, right? And oftentimes people think, I have a slow metabolism, so I'm going to gain weight more quickly, which generally isn't the case. Once you have a slow metabolism, it may make it harder to lose the weight, but it also makes it that more difficult to gain the weight as well. And let me explain. So a fast metabolism, or just let's, I guess, define metabolism, right? Metabolism is just all the different biological events that happen within the body to process nutrients through the body, right? And so a person who has fast metabolism means that these interactions are going to happen more quickly. And so stuff is going to process more fast through the body. A person with a slower metabolism, it's going to happen more slowly. Now, the person with a fast metabolism, it means that they're going to also get hungry more quickly than the person with a slower metabolism. If things are processing through your body more slowly, you are going to get hungry less often. And so if you are eating a naturally a balanced diet and stuff like that, and you're not, and I'll get to some things later on, you should, in theory, be hungry less frequently, therefore eat less food, therefore your body weight shouldn't change different to the fast metabolism person, right? Person with a fast metabolism, if you want to gain weight, then you're going to be able to metabolize or assimilate nutrients and more of these nutrients than a person with a slower metabolism. Case in point, these Bushmen living in the Kalahari Desert in Africa have slower metabolisms. Why do they have slower metabolisms? Well, they have a slower metabolism, number one, because they're pretty small people, right? If you're only 5 foot tall and like 100 pounds or whatever, your metabolic needs are not going to be that great. Second thing, food is generally scarce, and they're averaging walking 20 miles a day. Right? So they would have, if they had a fast metabolism, they'd be wasting themselves away to nothing. So they have to adapt to the environment that they're in. Okay, so I had to take a brief intermission there to go out for my weekend run. One thing that I have discovered over the years is that oftentimes you'll get so busy with life and you think, you know, I don't have time to go out and do a run or go for a walk or something like that, or any sort of workout, right? Because I'm just too busy right now. And that's kind of the state I'm in right now. I have multiple different projects that I'm juggling, and it's pretty exciting. I got all these things on the burners that I'm trying to do, and so I was tempted to just keep steamrolling through this video and try to finish it up. But one thing that I have learned is that if you don't pay now, you'll end up paying later for not doing the exercise. And what I mean by that is, years ago, so I was homeschooled all throughout grade school, right through high school, right? So my first experience with going to public school was when I went to the technical college, studying for my heating and air conditioning degree at that school, right? And so I realize, man, there's so much time that is wasted in a public school system because you go to the class, you get lectured during the class, then you go to another class where you're learning something completely different, and then when you're all done with that, you have to come back home, do homework on all these different classes, and try to remember what you learned in those classes while you're doing this homework, rather than as in homeschool where you read the textbook, you study the materials, you're doing the homework as you are doing the topics. So you're basically cutting your study time in half, right? And so I would get done with my classes and everything, and then I would stay at school afterwards, sometimes till 7, 8 o'clock at night, just studying, and ended up, graduating at the top of my class through all this process, but I was just burned out and fried. So years later, when I, and let me preface this by saying the reason I got into heating and air conditioning stuff, and you might be wondering, why were you doing heating and air conditioning stuff? Obviously, you're very passionate about fitness. Well, that was because of the stuff that I talked about earlier in this video, where I got really bad digestive issues, my health was a wreck, and so I realized that I had to go and try to do a more practical route for my career, because bottom line, you need to make money. It's ideal if you can make money through what you're passionate about, but I needed to make money through regardless, right? And so I had a buddy of mine who was going to school for heating and air conditioning. And my goal was that I did not want to have a job where I had to be chained to a desk all day. And I figured that the heating and air conditioning stuff, especially living in Wisconsin, would be a practical means for me to make a good living where I would not be chained to a desk and I could have a balance between, some intellectual stuff and also some hands-on stuff, and it wouldn't be beating my body down too much with the health conditions that I was experiencing at the time. So fast forward, I had changed degrees, or I changed directions, really did not like the heating and air conditioning field, and so I was, working at a grocery store, decided to go back to school, and this time I had to work full-time because the first time I gone through, it was just out of high school, I was still living with my parents, so I could did not have a lot of bills to pay or anything at the time. So when I was going back to school for physical therapy assistant, I had to work full-time and go to school full-time. So I decided I'm not going to burn myself out like I did with what I was doing before. So if I needed to, rather than forcing myself to study for 3, 4, 5 hours straight like I did when I was into my HVAC stuff, I would get up, make frequent breaks in between, go out for a run, go out for a walk, etc. And what I realized is that taking that hour, half hour, whatever it was, to go out and exercise, taking that time away from my study time did not actually detract from my study time. In fact, it made it so that I could accomplish what previously took me 3 hours of study time to accomplish in an hour, sometimes less. So not only was I doing something that was good for my health, both physically and psychologically, I was actually becoming more productive in the process as well. So when I started doing my video today, I got through the first couple of slides and I was like, you know what? I just need to go out and do this run. I was going to skip it, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to end up getting sluggish halfway through the day because I didn't get my run in, and then it's going to be later on in the day and I'm going to have less desire to go and do this walk, do this run, do this exercise that I'm planning to do. So let's take the break now, go and do the exercise, and I'll be grateful, have more energy to accomplish the things that I want to accomplish later on in the day anyway. All right, so getting back into the video after that intermission. So as I was talking about, just because you have a slow metabolism doesn't mean that it's going to make it so that you're going to gain weight more easily necessarily, right? Because as we established earlier, the metabolism is the total sum of all the biological processes that happen in your body, and if they happen faster, if they happen slower, will dictate how fast you get hungry, right? So if you get hungry less frequently, that means that you will probably end up eating less calories. Now, what actually ends up happening though is that this only works if you are metabolically healthy, meaning that your hormones such as leptin, ghrelin, insulin are all operating as they should, right? Now, if you're eating the standard American diet, which is typically high in refined carbohydrates, sugars from refined sources, or excessive amounts of sugars, oftentimes people, when they decide that they're going to eat healthy, they stop eating the unhealthy sugars, but they end up replacing them with a bunch of fruits, right? Or they eat a bunch of salads. And these things aren't bad, but they're not balanced from a macronutrient standpoint, right? So your diet shouldn't be primarily fruits and vegetables, right? Fruits and vegetables are good accents to the balanced diet of our grandparents, right? Like, so our grandparents, it was like, they would have meat, potato, and a vegetable, right? And then you'd have some dessert at the end. Now, what you could do to further increase the health of that meal is to have meat, potato, vegetable, and then have fruit instead of the, sugar, because refined sugar, you literally do not need it in your diet. It is actually an anti-nutrient. Not only does it not provide any additional nutrition for your body, it actually strips nutrients out of the body. So when you're eating a diet that is high in these heavily processed foods, it disrupts the normal hormone response that your body will give you. You will have blood sugar highs and lows. Your insulin will be all over the board, right? In turn, this will cause you, when you start to become insulin resistant, Then you will start to become also leptin resistant. So leptin is a hormone that is kind of like the fuel gauge in your car. It dictates how hungry you're going to get. So when you are in a state of low calories for a prolonged period of time, so a lot of times people who are in, figure competitions, bodybuilding competitions, right, where they are restricting their calories for a prolonged period of time, they're also increasing their activity level for a prolonged period of time. The body will start to be like, hey, let's increase hunger, right? That's leptin. Leptin is increasing your hunger, and let's also decrease movement. So even though you're still going to the gym, you're still working out, you're going to feel less like moving because of the leptin, right? The leptin is going to be like, hey, we need to conserve these calories. And it's also going to make you feel more hungry. So I experienced this in the past, back in early 2000s, right? I was very lean, and even though I could eat a lot of food coming out of this thing, right, because I had not crash dieted, I actually inadvertently done some pretty smart dieting stuff to get very lean, as I later learned on when I started studying bodybuilding and stuff like that. But until I lost a lot of this weight due to these digestive issues that I was having, right? So even though I was eating enough calories, my body, until I got into a healthy body fat percentage range, kept on making me hungry all the time. And again, that's this leptin thing going on. So this is what I mean by metabolic health. When you are metabolically healthy, the leptin will be operating appropriately. When you are not getting enough calories, your body will increase hunger and simultaneously cause you to inadvertently decrease energy expenditure. You'll be fidgeting less. You'll move less throughout the day outside of your gym activities. Now, if you are insulin resistant though, your body will not perceive that you're getting enough calories because even though there's calories coming in, you're not absorbing as much of these calories, and so the body will perceive that you are in this state of starvation, and so you'll start to become leptin resistant. Your leptin will not be operating appropriately. You will be not perceiving that it will be perceiving that you are still hungry, that you need to be eating more food, even though there is plenty of food available. So this is more often than not what is happening when somebody is saying that they have a slow metabolism, right? So they end up eating more frequently throughout the day because their blood sugar is off, right? But then the foods that they're eating are not foods that are foods that are storage type foods, right? When you're eating carbohydrates, there's nothing wrong with carbohydrates, right? So oftentimes carbohydrates get a bad rap because of refined carbohydrates, sugars and stuff like that. But in actuality, it's really hard to gain weight from eating too many carbohydrates. The way that you gain weight from eating too many carbohydrates is through a process called de novo lipogenesis. And that actually happens if you're eating many, probably 1,000 calories more through these carbohydrates, then you can have a small increase. I actually did a video or a Facebook post in the past outlining this in detail, how this actually happens. And it's actually quite a substantial amount of carbohydrates that you have to eat to actually cause fat gain to occur. What is more likely to occur is that in the standard American diet, you're also eating a lot of sugar, a lot of carbohydrates, and then you're also getting a lot of fats combined with that. So you're not getting very many complex carbohydrates or whole food substances of carbohydrates like your beans, sweet potatoes, whole potatoes, oatmeal, brown rice, things like that, right? You're not getting these kinds of carbohydrates. You're getting sugars like things from donuts. You're getting white bread. You're getting, white rice, things like that. And this is causing you to feel more hungry. And then in combination with that, you have the insulin going up and you have the fat. And so it causes you to not only be more hungry, but because you're getting plenty of carbohydrates and the insulin levels are elevated, there's no reason for you to be burning fat for fuel because you have plenty of carbohydrates available. So all that fat that you're eating in your diet gets deposited in your fat stores. And so this is where the fat is coming from, not from the carbohydrates. So I'm going to go into some of these principles in a little bit more detail later on in the video, but in summary, the cause for weight gain with slow metabolism is a combination of dysregulated hormones caused by poor food choices combined with sedentary lifestyle. All of these things combine to create this slower metabolic rate, which then, and then when you are having these dysregulated hormone response, you tend to consume more food, which then can cause the weight gain to pile up over time. And then when you try to go and lose the weight, your metabolism is messed up, and so it's harder to lose it. But as I'll show later on in the video, it is possible to increase the metabolic rate by making some changes to your diet and changes to how you eat. Okay, so the next point is there are also some misconceptions around the role of exercise when it comes to losing weight. A lot of people exercise by doing, especially doing more cardiovascular exercise with the purpose of burning more calories. They're trying to achieve a calorie deficit. Yes, exercise can help you to get into a calorie deficit. However, that should not and should never be the main goal of your exercise. Okay? Yes, you're going to burn some calories through exercise, but that is not the most significant role of the exercise in losing weight. Rather, it is the global effect on your metabolism because you're going to increase the metabolic activity of all tissues in your body through exercise. And this is why when you're doing an exercise routine, whether it is for building more muscle or losing body fat, you still want to be doing full body type movements. You want to be doing, i.e., these are compound movements, right? So you want to be doing things like your squats, your deadlifts, bench presses, overhead presses, and then also exercises where you are lifting things from the ground to overhead movements. You're doing chops, running, climbing, jumping, pull-ups, all these kind of things, push-ups, right? These are kind of even the crawling type exercises, right? Climbing ropes, things like that are going to use multiple muscles in the body all in coordination. Not only is this going to help you to increase anabolic hormones for muscle growth if you are at a calorie surplus, it's also going to help you to expend more energy overall and again increase that metabolic activity and systemic activation of all the tissues in the body over time. From an immune system standpoint, it's also important as well because these movements that are increasing the movement of all the tissues of the body are also increasing the movement of lymph or your lymphatic system throughout the body as well, which will help to improve your immune system. You probably also heard that one of the reasons that you want to strength train is to increase muscle because it's going to increase your metabolic rate. Well, a lot of people don't want to have Arnold Schwarzenegger sized muscle, right? But with that being said, muscle, yes, it will increase metabolic rate. However, it's not as substantial as you might think. It's only about 10 calories per pound of lean muscle, right? Pure muscle, about 10 calories per pound of that muscle per day increase in energy expenditure, right? However, when you are using those muscles, they will increase energy expenditure even more. So at rest, they're maybe only burning about 10 calories per pound of body weight, but when you are using them, especially in that holistic manner that I mentioned before, instead of focusing primarily on these isolation movements, working on full body movements, those movements are going to increase the energy expenditure over the course of the day, right? And in the days that follow. And over time, this increase in muscle mass with increase in energy expenditure is going to help to mobilize body fat that is stored in the body, provided that you are also following a diet that is conducive for this to happen, which I'm going to be covering in some of the following clips. Okay, so to summarize the preceding clips there, the role of exercise is to increase metabolic health in the long term rather than burning calories in the short term. The calories that you burn in this workout are not as important as the calories that you burn in the long run. And this is another thing that I want to point out. A lot of times, some of my clients, they come to some of my group exercise classes or whatever, and they have this mindset that the harder that I'm training in this class, the harder that I'm working, the more weight that I'm lifting, the more energy that I'm putting into this, the better my weight loss results are going to be. When in actuality, from an exercise standpoint, yes, high intensity exercise can be beneficial for burning visceral fat, i.e. the fat that is around your internal organs. However, the fat that is covering your muscles, right, that is underneath the skin, that fat is not as responsive to exercise as it is to diet, right? And this is why actually something low intensity, like just going for a walk, a slow jog, or getting on a bike and going for a leisurely, ride. Maybe you ride, on your bike 10, 15 miles or something like that, maybe even less. Just go for a leisurely ride on the bike. Can be actually more beneficial for losing that subcutaneous fat than the pushing yourself super hard in the gym. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're able to push yourself really hard in that exercise routine, you are, in all likelihood, burning primarily carbohydrates, because that is the fuel that is used for high intensity exercise. And if you're doing that every single time you go to the gym, it's going to be hard to sustain that. You're even like, I think we sometimes get this perception that every workout needs to be super high intensity, right? Because that's what we see. We see like people in the CrossFit Games, or people doing these Spartan races, or people who are running the Olympic marathon, or they're in the Olympics. We see people at their peak of athletic development, right? Or somebody who's in a powerlifting competition or a bodybuilding show. The reality is that is people when they are at their peak of performance, peak of conditioning. They're not at that point all the time. I recently got some feedback from a client of mine that I was training, and he's about 30 years old. He suffered a disc herniation getting hit from the side when he was at a stop sign, right? And he said it was a big mindset set shift for him to realize that we are training with that. The exercises that we're doing in the amount of reps and the amount of sets and the amount of weights that we're using in the specific order and the specific amount that we're doing them is all by design. He and I both fell into this trap in high school where we would just do as much as possible, as often as possible, and that's how we thought we needed to be. And I think a lot of people fall into this trap. But no, that's not how you need to be. It's you build up to it, and this is something that we call periodization, right? Where you have a goal where I'm gonna peak for this competition, or I'm gonna peak for this specific goal at this time. And so then you have your volume, you're building up your volume for a period of time, and then you start increasing your intensity for a period of time, and then you peak. And then you go back to normal training, right? And you start building up for the next cycle. But it's not always going as hard as you can all the time. This is just a recipe for burnout and injury in the long run. And you're probably most likely not just going to stick to your routine if you think that you need to train as hard as possible, as much as possible in the long run. This is probably why a lot of people don't like working out, and they think that it's not fun. Okay, so shifting away from exercise back to the diet. Another reason why a lot of people will have this slower metabolism, and they think that I am just genetically predisposed to have a slow metabolism, when in actuality a lot of it has to do with lifestyle factors. What I mean by this is, again, as I talked about before, when people are eating the standard American diet, high in refined carbohydrates, sugars, or just too many carbohydrates in general, and too little activity, right, or too many calories. So usually it's eating the stuff that is most tasty, eating energy stuff. This is fine when you are trying to exercise for performance, right? For performance, and this is a mistake that a lot of times guys who are trying to bulk up, they want to gain more muscle, so they think if I eat more protein, it'll help me build more muscle. Well, protein only helps to a certain extent. Really, about 0.7 grams per pound of lean body weight is all you need to optimize muscle growth. And so we generally just round that up to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body weight because it's easier to remember, right? And a little extra protein is going to hurt. But when you start getting this 1.5 grams of protein to 2 grams of protein per pound of lean body weight, that's when you start to have some issues, right? Now, it's the relative percentage as well, because you could have 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per pound of lean body weight, but just simply because you're eating so many calories overall, right? Now, you don't want to have more than 40% of your calories coming from protein, especially unless you are on a cut, right? If you are trying to bulk up, you don't need more. And so a lot of times this is where guys will, run into these difficulties, right? They will end up eating more protein thinking that it's going to help them, but what they're actually doing is they're suppressing their appetite by eating more protein, so their total calories get shrunk. This actually happened to me in high school. I was trying to bulk up. would eat a lot of cereal when I was a long distance runner. Initially, when I started adding more whey protein and stuff into my shakes on top of my cereal, I gained another 10 pounds and everything, but my total calories shrunk down because I wasn't as hungry by eating more protein. And protein is good for building muscle, but it's not particularly good for providing energy and fuel for the body. So contrast that, a lot of times when people are trying to diet or lose weight, they will eat less calories, but they will still continue to eat the same kind of calories that they were eating before they were losing weight. And these are typically energy things, because they're like, well, if I'm going to be reducing my calories, I want to at least be eating things that taste good to me. So they'd still be eating high carbohydrate foods, high fat foods, and they'll just be eating less of these foods. And so what actually ends up happening, if they indeed do get into a calorie deficit, they end up losing muscle and fat at even rates, and their strength tends to decrease as well, their athletic performance tends to decrease as well, and they're hungry all the time. And so what this brings up is another important point to keep in mind, is going back to hormones, right? We talk about insulin is a growth and storage hormone. So it's anabolic. And this is a reason why when you are in a bulk, when you are training for athletic performance, you don't need to eat as much protein because your body is in anabolic state. When you have plenty of carbohydrates, sugars, things like that in the body, insulin is elevated. It's shuttling nutrients, shuttling stuff into the body, and so you don't need as much protein to maintain your muscles. And this is also the problem of those people that I talked about before who are eating less, but they're still eating the same kind of foods, right? So when your insulin is up, you're going to be craving carbohydrates. So you're going to feel more hungry. Your body's going to also sense that you're in a calorie deficit because you're primarily burning carbohydrates, except you're not giving your body enough carbohydrates, so the metabolism is going to slow down. And then also because insulin is elevated, you're also not tapping into your fat stores as effectively, because there is an inverse relationship between insulin and human growth hormone. Human growth hormone is not only responsible for helping to grow bodily tissues, but it is also responsible for helping to mobilize fat in times of calorie restriction, and in conjunction with glucagon, which takes carbohydrates sources and converts them into carbohydrates, right? So human growth hormone, glucagon, and a couple other hormones help to release fat into the system. However, when insulin is elevated, human growth hormone and glucagon are suppressed. So when you're eating high carbohydrate foods, when you're trying to lose weight, you're not only going to be feeling hungry because you're getting these little spikes of insulin all the time, right? And your blood sugar spiking, you're also going to be suppressing that fat burning response. And this is why a lot of times people think, I'm just cursed with a slow metabolism, and they're not able to burn the body fat, is because the insulin is still elevated while they're trying to burn the body fat. Now what you could do is just stop eating food, right? So and this is the kind of the thing of fasting, right? So fasting and a ketogenic diet or a low carbohydrate diet operate on very similar principles. It's just that the ketogenic diet, you're still eating food, you're just not eating carbohydrates. But to get into ketosis, you don't need to eat a lot of fat, a lot of bacon, avocados, butter, all this kind of stuff, as is advocated on a ketogenic diet. To get into ketosis, you simply just need to eat very low levels of food, especially carbohydrates, right? And this is what happens when if you don't eat for a couple of days, your body is going to burn through all of its carbohydrate stores. It's going to use up the glycogen that is in muscles, which is basically just carbohydrates stored in those muscles and in your liver, and it's going to have no other fuel to burn, so it's going to have to start converting body fat into fuel. And this is done through creating ketone bodies out of your body fat stores, and hence the ketogenic diet. Now, because it's hard to just go from eating normally to just not eating at all, that's why a great segue into fasting is to actually adopt a lower carbohydrate diet or a ketogenic diet. It helps you to get more adapted at burning fat and naturally segue into fasting. And actually, this is what happened for me. I had to get up really early in the morning for work, and I wasn't a morning person, right? Typically, I'd be eating, the standard balanced bodybuilding diets. I'd be eating oats and eggs, or, eggs and toast, or, whey protein and oatmeal, or something like that, for breakfast. And I found that I was very sleepy, having to be to work at, 5, 6 in the morning or whatever, having to get up earlier when I'm not really a morning person. And so I'd be falling asleep, because when you have these starchy carbohydrates combined with relatively low-fat meal, it increases levels of serotonin in the body, which make you feel more relaxed. So when you're already tired, you don't want to feel more relaxed. So what I did was backloaded my carbohydrates. So I'd eat more carbohydrate-rich foods later in the day, and instead skip them in the morning. So I'd eat, vegetable omelets. So higher protein and fat and lower carbohydrates in the morning. Later on, I learned why this was so effective. When you eat in this manner, high protein, high fat, it increases levels of dopamine. This makes you more motivated, more driven, which is what you want early on in the day. You're also more alert mentally because you don't get this serotonin response where you're feeling, I feel nice and happy. And that's why we get the principle of the comfort food, right? Eating comfort foods because it increases levels of serotonin. You feel good, you feel relaxed. Well, early in the morning in the day, you don't want to feel like that. You want to feel driven. You want to feel hungry like a wolf. Let's go out, let's go and conquer. And then in the evening, you want to have that rest, digest, so that you can repair yourself, feel restored, and get back to fighting the battles later on in the day. So to summarize the previous slides that I made, they're talking about the human growth hormone, insulin, right? How you can increase your metabolic rate and increase your fat burning is by reducing the amount of carbohydrates, especially from refined sources that you're getting in your diet. And you don't have to go ketogenic right away. In fact, I advise all my clients to first take what I call a metabolic typing questionnaire. This questionnaire, basically you answer a list of questions relative to what you like to eat, when you like to eat it, what makes you sleep better, what makes you feel more energized, all these different things, a variety of different things. And it categorizes you into 1 of 3 different basic metabolic types. You have a carbohydrate type, which would be more of a vegetarian, high carbohydrate, lower fat type person, a person who kind of thrives on that sort of diet. You'd be a mixed type, which is your basic balanced diet. Maybe you'd have kind of a zone sort of diet, 40-30-30, right? You have the protein type, which would be closer to a low carb or a ketogenic sort of diet. And then based upon that, you kind of set the framework for your diet, right? So the first thing that most people can do, even before doing that, is just eat a balanced diet. So having, the size of the palm of your hand, the thickness of the palm of your hand. For women, have 1 portion of those at each meal. For men, have 2 portions of those at each meal. And then about the size of your fist at each meal for your starchy carbohydrate, and then have a serving or 2 of non-starchy cruciferous vegetables at your meal, and then having 20 to 30%, maybe 40% of your diet from fats, depending on how much carbohydrates in your diet. Start out with the basics. Eliminate refined sugars and grains from your diet. Eat whole food sources right off the bat. That's going to help to start to make you more metabolically healthy. Now, some people, if you are really to one extreme and your body is hormonally out of whack, you might need to go to the other extreme to bring your body back into balance. Simply eating a healthy, sensible diet might not be enough for some people. You might need to eat that healthy, sensible diet and then go to a really low carb diet for a while, maybe doing this carnivore diet, maybe doing a ketogenic diet for a while, and then slowly start to integrate more fruits, more starches back into your diet over time as you start to need them, right? And this is actually what happened to me years ago. So I was eating, I tried to fix some of my digestive issues by eating a vegetarian diet, except it was more of a grainitarian diet. I ate way too much starches, way too much other things like that. And that's one of the problems when you're eating this vegetarian or this vegan sort of diet. In order to get the amount of protein that you need, you're also greatly increasing the total amount of calories that you're eating, just because the concentration of protein in beans, nuts, seeds, things like that are not as high as they are in meat. So you're getting a boatload of carbohydrates and fats, which bumps up the total amount of calories. And so I was eating way too many carbohydrates to get my protein requirements on this diet. And so I had to go back, when I started eating normally again, go very low carbohydrate to bring my body back into balance. And now I eat kind of a mix of things. I still tend to start off all my meals with proteins, healthy fats, and vegetables, and then I add in the carbohydrates as I need that, starchy carbohydrates as I need them, but I do tend to eat a little bit more in balance. So if that is the case, if you've kind of wrecked your metabolic health for various different reasons, you might need to be a little bit more extreme to the other end to bring swing the pendulum back towards a balanced state, and then once it starts going too far to the other extreme, bring it back. And so over time, you swing, 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 and eventually these pendulum swings become smaller and smaller and smaller until you're right in balance where you need to be. Okay, so next I want to cover, can a low carbohydrate diet increase your metabolism? So years ago, I was listening to some information from Dr. Jade Teta. He actually specializes in helping people with fat loss, right? And I learned a lot of really good information from him. One of them was that you want a lower carbohydrate or decreased carbohydrate diet to optimize fat loss, but not no carbohydrate, because in the long run, your metabolic rate can slow down due to the Krebs cycle. And he gave the illustration of water wheel, right? So a water wheel, if you have like a ton of water flowing over this water wheel, right? At a certain point, it's kind of like similar to riding a bike down a hill. At a certain point, you're going to reach peak velocity where the mechanics of the water wheel or the bicycle wheel, even if you're going to reach a point where the tire is not going to spin any faster, or the wheel's not going to spin any faster, despite increasing the amount of water flowing over it, right? Now, if you drastically decrease the amount of water flowing over the wheel at the mill, it's going to slow the rate that the wheel is flowing, right? And so he's like, you want to find the balance between decreasing the amount of water so that you can get to this deficit, so decreasing the amount of carbohydrates that are coming into the body to decrease total calories, but not so much that you decrease the rate that your Krebs cycle or your energy production or your metabolism is running at, right? So you want to find that balance in between there, right? Now, so I did a little bit of digging around, and there is also some other research too that shows that a low carbohydrate, not no carbohydrate diet does in fact increase metabolic rate. So they did a study of, I believe it was 164 people for 20 weeks. They had an initial weight loss phase to establish a baseline, kickstart their fat loss, right? They had them lose on average about 25 pounds or about 12% of their body weight, right? Before starting this test. And then they divided the individuals into one of three different groups. They had a low carbohydrate, they had a high carbohydrate, low fat group, which had about 60% of their calories coming from carbohydrates and about 20% of their calories coming from fat. They had a moderate carbohydrate group, which had about 40% of carbohydrates from calories from carbs, 40% from fat. And then they had the low carbohydrate group, which is only about 20% of calories coming from carbohydrates and 60% of their calories coming from fat. Now, this is not a ketogenic diet per se, although if you are doing marathon training while you are on this diet, you might indeed be able to get into ketosis simply because you're burning so many extra calories, and you could, in fact, probably deplete your carbohydrate stores on this diet, right? So, throughout the diet, protein was maintained at 20% across the board of calories, right? They also adjusted the calories up and down throughout to prevent any weight loss from happening, right? So they wanted to try to maintain everything in metabolic, or try to maintain energy balance throughout. Throughout the course of this 20-week study, all meals were prepared for the participants, because this is one downside of a lot of studies, is that it's really hard and actually I found this with my clients too, and one of the reasons why, one of the things that I want to do for them is to get a meal app where I have a bunch of recipes, everything, so that everything is prepared for them. They know exactly what they eat, when they need to eat it, all that kind of stuff. Because I provide that information, but to make it as simple as possible. Because when you're trying to do all this stuff on your own, that is a lot of times where people end up getting off track. And so what the researchers did is they eliminated the possibility that people would not be eating what they were supposed to be eating by preparing the specific meals in the proportions that they needed to be for all the participants throughout the course of the study. The types of foods that were in the diet, were designed to be as similar as possible as well. They had different ratios of macronutrients, but the kinds of foods that they were eating were very, very similar. In addition, the high carbohydrate group ate a lot more fruits and vegetables and whole grains. And then the low carbohydrate group completely eliminated grains and only ate moderate amounts of certain types of fruits and vegetables. So during the course of this 20-week study, energy expenditure was measured, and at the end of the study, nobody had lost any additional weight. And this is not surprising because, as you may remember from before, energy intake was adjusted up or down to maintain this balance, right? Now, there was minimal difference in secondary measures like physical activity, right? So non-exercise thermogenic energy expenditure, or your NEAT, right? So, which has become more popular, right? Because all the activity that I talked about with leptin, right? Your NEAT tends to decrease when leptin energies are increased because your body is trying to conserve energy. So they also, and this is pretty smart of them, monitored these factors as well to try to maintain that as consistent as possible across the board. So at the end of the study, what they determined was that the people in the low carbohydrate group actually increased energy expenditure by so the rate of calories that they were burning had increased by anywhere between 200 to about 280 calories per day on this low carbohydrate diet. In the moderate carbohydrate diet, their energy expenditure was not quite as significant, but was still more significant than the high carbohydrate group, which was expending about another 100 calories per day above and beyond their baseline metabolic rate. The researchers also found that this increase in metabolic rate was the most significant in the group that had the highest insulin secretion, anywhere between 300 to almost 500 extra calories per day in these people that had the most severe metabolic impairment. And this is kind of interesting too, because they've also found this in terms of people with testosterone, right? With guys with testosterone. So with guys who were very overweight, when they adopted a very low carbohydrate diet, the most significant increases in testosterone came from the guys who had the most body fat to lose. And this is not surprising because fat on the body also increases levels of estrogen, right? So when you have more fat in your body, there's a hormone called aromatase, which converts free testosterone into estrogen and thereby creating more body fat. So when you have more fat, you create more estrogen. When you have more estrogen, you create more fat, and it's this vicious cycle of creating more fat in this circle like that. So when they reduced their carbohydrate levels, that went into this ketogenic state or whatever, their insulin levels came down, their body fat started to reduce, and they saw the most significant increases in testosterone. Now, by contrast, a guy who's already pretty lean and he diets down to get shredded for a bodybuilding competition, if you get too low in body fat percentage, if you get too low in energy intake, then your testosterone levels can also decrease. So it's about balance. If you're severely overweight, decreasing your calories, decreasing your carbohydrates can help you to increase testosterone levels. If you're a normal weight, severely decreasing calories and carbohydrates can impair your testosterone levels, and that's why this balance is important. So what these researchers found in this study between the high carbohydrate, moderate carbohydrate, and low carbohydrate diets was that people who had the most severe metabolic impairment did in fact see the most positive increases in their metabolic rate from following a low carbohydrate diet. And this is why, as I talked about before, initially you might need to go to this extreme to help restore metabolic health, and then once that has happened, you might need to go back to that balanced or quote-unquote sensible way of eating, where you're eating whole foods, you're eating them in balance, and you're getting a moderate amounts of activity. But if you have been doing things extremely wrong for a long period of time, you might need to go to the other extreme to swing the pendulum back towards moderation, and then as it swings too far to the other way, start bringing it back, and then gradually fine-tune and get where you need to be. So the last thing that I want to talk about in this video is a hypothesis of mine of why is it that metabolism would tend to increase on a low carbohydrate diet. And it goes back to the hormones that I was talking about before, right? So when you are eating a lot of sugars, a lot of carbohydrates all the time, right? Your body doesn't need to really tap into fat, right? And when you reduce calories for a sustained period of time, usually about 21 days, the metabolism, your energy expenditure will start to decrease, right? But what they found was that, so there was this study done in Great Britain or Scotland or something, right? I believe it was actually Scotland. And under medical supervision, I think this was in the 50s or maybe the 40s, under medical supervision, there was this gentleman, he was around 300 plus pounds, and he, under this medical supervision, decided that he was not going to eat for an entire year. He would drink water, and he would take vitamin and mineral supplements, but did not eat any food for an entire year. And what they found was that his baseline metabolic rate stayed at about 2,000 calories per day, even though he did not eat anything for 2 years. So why is it that people after about 21 days or roughly 2 weeks, a little bit, maybe a week and 2.5 weeks of not eating enough calories, that their metabolic rate tends to slow down? Well, one hypothesis for this is that when the body perceives, again with that leptin, right, that you're not getting enough calories coming in, and if you are eating predominantly carbohydrates in your diet, and if they're refined carbohydrates, your body is a sugar burner, right? It doesn't really know how to use fat that well for energy. So when you are in this starvation mode, when you are reducing calories, you're not giving your body enough of the fuel that it needs, but you're still giving it that fuel. Then your body's going to see, oh, we're in a starvation state. We need to start conserving energy. And so it'll slow down your metabolic rate, increase hunger. On the flip side, if you go even further down, whereas if you just don't eat, right, like this guy did, or you drastically reduce carbohydrates while still keeping fat and protein constant, or maybe even increasing the fat slightly, right, then your body, after a period of time, starts to become fat adapted. And it doesn't matter if the fat is coming from your diet, bacon, avocados, butter, cheese, all that kind of stuff, or if it's coming from body fat. Can't really distinguish the difference, right? And every person, regardless of how lean they are, has enough fat in their body to provide energy for a couple of days when they're not eating, right? And if you're really overweight like this guy, you have a lot of fat on your body to provide calories for a prolonged period of time. And so if you are not getting enough fat in the diet, the body will convert over to burning the body fat. And since it's burning fat for fuel, it doesn't perceive that you're not getting enough calories because it has plenty of fat from the fat of the body to burn, and so the metabolism doesn't slow down. And because you are not increasing insulin and storage and all that kind of stuff, and creating that conflict between human growth hormone and insulin that I talked about before, insulin being the storage hormone, human growth hormone being the fat mobilization hormone, right? Then it would make sense that your metabolic rate would remain the same or even slightly increase because it has less of this resistance and conflict between insulin and human growth hormone. All right, guys. So, in closing, your metabolism is largely a result of your dietary and activity history, and is not set in stone. You can change it by making different habits and different choices. A lot of times we look at people who are very thin, or you'll see these guys who are like, man, I just can't gain weight. But you'll notice they get very busy and they won't eat for a prolonged period of time. Then they'll eat a bunch of food, or the food that they eat will tend to be things that are already, like, they'll eat more food, but it'll be stuff like steak and vegetables and, even eating a pizza, right? They'll be eating less things like cookies and stuff like that. Or they won't eat, or if they do eat a lot of sugar or something, they won't eat a lot of anything else. And so there's usually reasons why people are the way that they are. And so if you can become a detective rather than a dieter and start to combine the science and compare it to how does the science of weight loss, fat loss, and stuff compare to what I'm currently doing, and start to eliminate the discrepancies between the two, you can revamp your metabolism, revamp your health, and achieve that fast metabolism kind of person. So one last thing before I close is that growing up through high school, I was very religious about my exercise and my diet and stuff like that. And I didn't eat a lot of fat, and I ate more carbohydrates as a result, and particularly fruit, because I figured, well, the fruit burns off pretty fast. When I switched to the more vegetarian sort of diet, initially, and then I had gone to this diet doctor, and he said, to eliminate the candida that I was having, I needed to not eat sugar, specifically also the fruit that I was eating, right? And so I was eating very low glycemic stuff. I was eating sweet potatoes, beans, meats, vegetables, right? And just the process of doing that, I found that I could eat more total food, more calories and stuff like that, and actually be leaner than I ever had been before, even without increasing exercise, simply by changing the foods that I was eating. And my metabolism actually increased. And so when I look at some of my friends that were very lean, they also ate in this manner. So start looking at and observing the way that some of your friends who have fast metabolisms, or quote unquote fast metabolisms, how do they live their lives? Are they always eating a ton of food? How is their activity levels, right? What are the different factors that are potentially affecting those things? And then the other thing is too, just because somebody is skinny doesn't necessarily mean that they're healthy either. You could have a skinny person and sometimes they're metabolically unhealthy because they have become insulin resistant, and so they actually can't absorb as much of those carbohydrates that they're taking in, and they become more diabetic. Now this usually happens with people who become overweight first, and then initially their body stores a bunch of stuff, and then they stop storing it because they become so insulin resistant that they're not getting those nutrients in. But it can also happen on the other flip side of things, where if you don't eat a lot of, oftentimes a person would be like, I can't bulk up, I can't build muscle, but they can eat just about anything they want and not gain weight. Once they increase their protein to the ideal range of 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body weight, then they have to become a little bit more judicious about what they eat, because now they're eating a little bit more of everything. So there's a lot of different factors to consider in that regard, but hopefully this video was a little bit beneficial, a little bit eye-opening to you in realizing that your metabolism is not set in stone. There are things that you can do to help improve your metabolic health, and one of the first things to do is to switch to eating a more whole foods sort of diet, eating in balance, and then sometimes for some people going to a little bit more extreme of eating a lower carbohydrate diet in the beginning, or maybe a low fat diet for some people, but typically a low carbohydrate diet is going to be a little bit better for you, and that can help you to improve your metabolic health as a whole. So guys, if you like the video, hit the button. If you'd like to see more content related to fat loss like this video, muscle diet regarding athletic performance, building muscle, how to structure your workouts for athletic performance, fat loss, building muscle, how to work around injuries that you might sustain in the process of getting in shape, and the best ways to help prevent some of those injuries from happening in the first place. Consider subscribing to the channel by hitting the button in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And we'll see you all next time for more health and fitness information.